Hello. In this video, I'm going to go over some other options for design, um, things that will help when laying out your page, and some other options that you have access to. So, in the case of a page with a column like this, community page from 2019 that I just pulled up, um, you want to separate the column from the rest of the page because it's its own separate story, so it has its own it needs to be separated from everything else. Since it runs the whole length of the page, there's really no natural barrier like a headline or a photo that slices it up. So you have to add it on your own. I'm sorry, those are my dogs in the background. So you have to add it on your own with a hairline. And hairlines are a useful tool for adding artificial barriers when you need space in between, or when you have space in between something and you need to differentiate it. But you can't overuse hairlines too much because they can crowd up a page. In the case of all columns, uh, they get a hairline between them and the rest of the page. And to do that, it's pretty easy. There's this line tool, and you turn on your grid, and you just draw a line going down the middle of that column and meet it on the other side, and make sure that it's at 0 degrees so that your line is perfectly straight up and down. And it might spawn it at 0 point or 1 point. InDesign will kind of guess what you want. But all of our hairlines are 0.5, and that's going to be the hairline. Now, for this case, since we have this line here up at the top, we want to shrink that hairline a little bit so that it looks a little better and make it level with maybe the top of this text box here. And that gives us a little bit more of a uniform look. Now, all hairlines are going to be 0.5 point, except for those that run on pages with monthly columns. Because we want this column to stand out a little more, these hairlines are going to be 1 point. And that's going to give it just a little bit, something a little bit more substantial, so that this stands out. Everybody knows it's its own column. And that's straight up and down, right between there, and that's pretty simple. Now the other tool you can use when you need to differentiate a page to artificially break it up when there's no natural barrier is a gray box. So say on this page here, this Naper settlement story, it kind of blends in with the story about Scott Huber here, and you need to separate it. And you could use a hairline, but like we said, we don't want to overuse hairlines when you have other options available. And the other option you have is a gray box. And a gray box is just a little background that goes behind the text and the whole story package that can separate the story from whatever it's next to when you need to create some different entry points. And to create a gray box, it's pretty easy. You go over this frame tool that we've used in the past. Just below that, there's one called rectangle, and you're just going to draw a rectangle over where you want that gray box to be. And I've drawn it right there. And to give it that gray tint, you first have to fill it black. So if you head up towards where the stroke area is, you can select fill with black, and that's going to make it the black box. But obviously you can't see through the black box, so you have to make it gray, and you do that by changing the opacity or the tint. And our gray boxes get set to a tint of 30. It might look a little bit light on your screen, but that is going to change once it gets actually printed. So it looks a little bit lighter, or it looks a little bit darker than you see it on your screen. So we set our tint to 30, and there's our gray box. If for some reason the gray box is covering the text, you can actually right-click it, go to Arrange, and you send to the back, and that's going to put the gray box behind everything else on the page to make sure that it's not obscuring anything. And you can see that when you add a gray box behind something, it creates a little bit more of a barrier, and it stands out. Again, another point of entry. One other thing to note when having a gray box, the text box has to be slightly smaller than the gray box, because you still want a little bit of a margin so the text isn't butting up to the edge. And that can just be done by creating a slightly smaller text box, or by adding a whole text box indent, either one, whichever is easier in the situation that you're designing. And that about wraps up everything for these artificial barriers that you can add in.